Loops, Part 1. General comments. Python does not have an until statement. They only have a while statement. Python also only allows pre-test loops. There is no syntax for a post-test loop. Python also has a counter control loop or a for loop. The syntax of a loop in Python. Remember, much like the if structure, the indenting is what tells Python that it is a block of code. So the syntax will read while a certain condition, colon, and then your code underneath. Notice that that code underneath is indented. Once the code matches back up with the while statement, then that tells Python that that loop is over. Now, what may be very confusing is the fact that sometimes in our pseudocode, and especially in Raptor, we were using or limited to until logic. So in the example that I have here, this is just in pseudocode. We're declaring a name as a string. Then we're writing to a prompt to the screen that says, enter the name of your brother and sister. Once the user enters in the word done, then our loop is done. So we will do until the name equals done, and then we'll keep prompting and asking the user to enter it over and over and over again. In Python, we're going to declare our name as a string, and then we'll prompt for the name of the brother and sister, but our loop logic is going to be a little more different. It's going to read while name is not equal to the word done. So basically we're just reversing what it is that we're looking for. Floor and seal. Your book mentions a little bit about what this is, and I thought it would be good to include a slide or two about what this is. So these are two functions that come within the math library that allow us to manipulate numbers. So let's just review shortly what a library is. A library is a package of pre-written code. Most of the time these are functions that we can use. So the focus really isn't on understanding what the code is, but understanding how we're going to use it. In order to access a particular library's function, we need to use what's called dot notation. So if you see in the little bit of code below, I have written math.floor, and this will allow us to use the floor function within the math library. So here's an example of what floor and seal does. Floor truncates while seal rounds up. So when we look at math.floor 3.2, we basically truncate the 0.2 and it's 3. Math.floor 2.6 is 2. As I mentioned, seal on the other hand rounds up always. So math.seal 3.2 is actually equal to 4, and this kind of counters what a normal rounding function would do. Random numbers. In your Zyanti material, you're going to notice in Chapter 5 that they do use, and they do generate some random numbers. So let's take a minute to just explain what that is. So we're going to use the random library, much like in the slide before we were using the math library. Now we're going to be using the random library that comes with a lot of interesting functions that we can use to generate random numbers. So the three here that I'm going to mention is randint, uniform, and seed. So randint allows us to generate random integers. And if you can look at the bullet where I say random integer equals, you can notice the dot notation is used again. The first number in parentheses, the 1, is where we start, and the last is 100, which is where we end, and those values are inclusive. Uniform goes ahead and allows us to generate random floating point numbers, and that function works the same as randint. Seed allows us to reset the starting value. So sometimes within our code we'll want to reset how the seed works. Now let me explain a little bit about seed. Seed is basically a value that is pulled from the system clock. So when we reset the seed, we're basically resetting the starting point. This is important because with processors as quick as what they are today, if you generate two random numbers, one line after the next, often what will happen is you'll get the same number because the seed will get pulled from the system clock the same. So sometimes we have to reset the seed in order to get two different numbers. Now, please note that if you're going to need to generate a random number for cryptography or something involving security, you're probably not going to want to use any one of these functions because these numbers aren't truly random. For loops. As mentioned, Python does have the syntax for a for loop. And remember, this is a counter-controlled loop. Often we use these with lists and dictionaries. So let's just review. What is a list? What is a dictionary? A list is basically a data type within Python that allows us to hold on to more than one value. A dictionary is a little different in that it allows us to hold on to more than one value, but that value also corresponds to something else. So I want to take you right now to where Zayante mentions this to kind of explain a little bit more, and then I want to show you what this looks like in Python code. Okay, so here we are in chapter 5.5 of your Zayante book, and I just wanted to explain a couple of things because the book assumes you know a little bit more about lists and dictionaries than what we've covered. Because I wanted to have your discussion of this actually later in the term. So here in activity 5.51, iterating over a list using a for loop, here Bill, Corey, and John, that is a list. And basically a list in Python allows us to store multiple values as opposed to just one. Up until this point, we've been using variables to hold on to just one value. Now, and in the next couple of weeks, we'll learn about lists that can hold on to more than one. So that's basically what this is. It's a list. This is what they call a dictionary. Now, a dictionary data type allows you also to store more than one value, but it also allows you to store something that corresponds with this. So here they have TV channels. So they're saying that the channel name is MTV. 35 is the numeric channel on the TV where you can find MTV. So much like a written dictionary, the first is going to be a value, and then the second is going to be something that corresponds to that value. Much like when you look in a dictionary, you'll see the word bug, and then next to the word bug, the meaning of the word bug. So what this means here, okay, in this area here, is basically they're pulling out the value separate from the definition. The S means that we're formatting it as a string, and the D means basically we're formatting it as a number. Now, I want to quickly go, because this is where this gets a little confusing. So I'm going to go back to Python here. And here is a little program that I wrote that has a dictionary called My Grades. And you can see I loaded into it the words Lab 1 and then the grade, Lab 2 and the grade, Homework 1 and EE1. So how do we work with this? Well, the best way to work with this is using a for loop. And how this reads is for value. Value is just any type of variable. It could be whatever you want. In My Grades. My Grades is the dictionary. Now what Python will do is at that line of code it will go in and reference My Grades, the dictionary, and determine that this loop has to go around 4 times because there's four lines in this dictionary. So how do we pull each part? Well, rather than using what the Zayante book used, I decided to pull out each part of the dictionary so that we can print it and it'll make a little bit more sense. So I'm assigning a variable called assignment to value. So that's going to be the first part of the dictionary. In order to grab the second part, I've got to use the line My Grades value. Okay, and I'm going to assign that to grade. So when I run this, when I run it, Okay, this is what we get. Let me run it again so that you can see it with both windows. So you can see that as it goes through, it prints assignment, then it prints the value, prints the lab, prints the value, and so forth and so on. So now I'm going to quickly just go back to Ziante, because the reason why I'm going through all of this with you is to basically point out you're going to have a challenge homework assignment where you're dealing with a dictionary. So what they want you to do is print out the email first, the word is, and then um, the name. When you're writing this, okay, try to go back and use figure 5.51 as an example. But remember, this dictionary has a string data type with a number, whereas, which is why we have the %D, because we're formatting it as a number. Whereas in the dictionary in that assignment, you're dealing with two strings. If you have any questions about this homework, please post it to the discussion forum and we can try to work on it together. And I'm hoping that the little explanation that I have is going to help. I'm also going to make available to you this little program that I wrote in Python so that you can kind of get a better idea on what a dictionary is. Finally, in order to work with lists or work with the for loop, we have to talk about the range function. And basically this allows for counting. The syntax for some variable in range, start, end, and then step. So the start is going to be where we're going to want to start counting. End is going to be where we want to end. It doesn't include that value. And step is how we're going to go about counting. So in the example that I have on the screen, you can see that we have for count in range 0, 5. So we're going to start our counting at 0. We're actually going to end at 4. Hopefully this has helped you to understand a little bit more about the Ziante Chapter 5. If you have any questions, please post those to the appropriate discussion forum.